Welcome again to For Life Live. I'm Reverend Jeff Duncan, the Director of Mission and Ministry at Lutherans for Life and your host. I'll be posting our archive page and the details about future events into the chat box for you. Again, I always encourage you to go to our website, lutheransforlife.org, find one of our support us, join buttons, click on that, because Lutherans for Life does exist because you desire it to exist. As an organization, we are supported by your generosity, those who want to partner with us on life issues, to focus the gospel of forgiveness in Jesus Christ, and to allow that forgiveness to be spoken to and uplifted into the hearts and minds of others, that they might hear of forgiveness and be equipped to teach others about that same forgiveness in Christ when it comes to life issues. If you desire to be a partner with an organization like this, if you would like to join one of our life teams or our life chapters, you can go to our Frontlines page on our website and explore that. If you've already partnered with us, thank you for doing that, and please consider continuing that partnership in the future on maybe a monthly basis. And if you're currently supporting LFL, think about a year-in gift as well. We always appreciate and encourage your continued support so that we can reach more and more people so that they too can become gospel-motivated voices for life. Our next session will be November 16th, 7 p.m. Reverend Michael Solomink, our Executive Director of Lutherans for Life, is going to discuss life ministry and some of the newer technologies, some of the challenges as well as the blessings that come forth for those on the life front. So I'll put a registration link into the chat box for that. And I'll also put a registration link for this session today as well into the chat box in case you want to send that immediately to somebody and have them join before our session's over. So folks, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, our marriages matter to the Lord of the church. If we as Christians who profess a love and trust in our Lord Jesus don't do everything in our powers to help preserve good Christian marriage attitudes and actions, who will? And when marriages hurt in the church, so does our life ministry. Because marriage is a central factor to life issues and decisions, when a couple is struggling, often life issues struggle as well. Therefore, it is important for our life teams and life chapters to promote and honor strong, healthy, godly marriages and celebrate the same within your congregation and your community. So as you listen to our presenter tonight, I want you to think about how your life ministry could affirm and support your pastoral staff and the ministry of your congregation to build strong, healthy, thriving marriages. And in so doing, you will also support life, and you will be accomplishing the mission of LFL, which is to equip Lutherans and their neighbors to be gospel-motivated voices for life. So let us pray. O Lord God, at the creation of Adam and Eve, you instituted and blessed marriage as the union of man and a woman, and commanded that it be held in honor by all. Grant your blessings to all married couples that their life together may be blessed with wisdom, purity, self-sacrifice, and love through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Well, tonight our presentation is on life ministry and strong marriages, divorce-proofing your marriage, and we are honored to have as our guest presenter, Toni Larson. And Toni is a licensed independent social worker with Lutheran Family Services out of Fort Dodge, Iowa. But she also serves as well in South Dakota and Nebraska via telehealth. She's been with Lutheran Family Services for about 13 years and a therapist for 40. And she's currently director of counseling, working in numerous settings, including outpatient substance abuse, in-home family therapy, school, social work, outpatient mental health, inpatient psychiatric mental health, case management for the frail elderly, nursing home social work, and hospice. She's also experienced in marriage and family therapy, individual therapy, group therapy, educational presentations, and she works with most ages. So tonight we're going to hear a little bit about strength training for marriage. She's going to share a PowerPoint with us that's going to recognize marriage as a journey and that communication is a key. She's going to show you about replacing a fear cycle with a caring cycle, help you identify emotional triggers, recognize and head off the Four Horsemen, and then urge you to design a strength training plan. So as we give a welcome to Toni and she prepares to share her screen, let's thank the Lord for the gifts that she brings to us this night. Toni, welcome.
All right, I got to get back to where I need to be. Are you hearing me okay?
We do hear you good.
Okay. All right, thanks for having me. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my history, and I've been doing this work for 40 years, and over the course of 40 years, I've kind of developed various ideas and philosophies, and I want to kind of share where I'm at with that right now. One of the most challenging tasks that God has given me to pursue has to do with marriage and family therapy. I think that it's challenging because in the room that you're working with someone, you're working with not just one person, but you're working with two if it's a couple usually. And then with family therapy, you may be working with the children, maybe extended relatives, and those kinds of folks. And so there's a lot of different agendas going on in the room at the same time. So it makes it very challenging. We know that the divorce rate across the country hovers between 40 and 50%. And I think that we probably don't know the full extent of what we would consider to be divorce, because there are many couples who are living together and may be, in essence, closing in on what is common law marriage. And so there may not actually be a divorce or divorce statistics that goes into that. About 40 to 50% is just terribly unacceptable, but that's where we're at. The percentage of divorce increases with future marriages. So if your percentage is at 40 or 50% for the first marriage, when you get into a second marriage, the rates go up higher, and a third marriage, the rate goes up even higher. What I like to take a look at is that when I'm working with folks, I'm finding that those who have a faith base, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be a strong faith base, but a certain faith base about believing that marriage is for life, that God hates divorce, and that it is important to continue to try to make things work out because of that faith base. But as you all probably know, that it appears that, again, our country is going in a direction of fewer and fewer people being connected to a strong faith. And that makes marriage counseling even more difficult because we don't have that to fall back on. So what I'm going to present tonight is a framework with a couple of key concepts that I feel can be really useful throughout the marriage journey. And I'm going to explain in just a minute what I mean by marriage journey.
Toni, I'm going to stop you for a second. I don't think your screen is sharing correctly. So
okay,
if you want to try to start it again, because I'm only seeing a black screen.
Oh, you are? Okay. So screen sharing.
Why don't you stop what you're sharing now?
Stop. Okay, and go back.
And then go back and reshare. Still not seeing it.
All right. Well, I'm not sure what to do about that.
Go ahead and stop again.
All right.
And would you like me to take over and share mine of your presentation?
You sure can.
Okay, let me do that.
Stop share.
Can everybody see that now? Okay. So Toni, you tell me which slide you want me to be on now.
Well, you're on Lutheran Family Service. Do you, can you have the side slides up? That's what it's showing on my section.
Mhm.
Can you get rid of the side slides?
I
Just go full screen.
am full screen on mine.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that's fine to be on this one. Why don't you go to the next one? Next slide.
There we go.
So I'm not sure what's happening here, Jeff, because that's not changing for me. Strength training, marriage for life. Is that what you have on your screen?
Strength training with a heart lifting a weight.
All right. That's not showing for me. How about other participants?
I have Lutheran Family Service.
Okay.
I do too.
Tell me what you see now, folks.
Lutheran Family Service, and then the side slides are showing as well.
All right. Sorry for this, folks.
We did practice this.
We did practice this earlier. Now what
Okay,
do you?
now I'm seeing the heart.
Okay, and that's all you're seeing?
Yep.
Okay, is that where we need to be?
Back it up one slide if you would. Yep, there we go.
All right.
All right. Okay, here we go again.
Sorry.
So again, looking at my perspective of when I approach a married couple and their journey, is that when we talk about developmental stages of growing up, developmental stages are various tasks that, starting as children, that we go through to move up to the next level of our development. For example, developmental stages of babies could be holding their head up, rolling over, crawling, walking, and as they develop, then they are also interacting with their environment, becoming aware of other people, going to school, connecting with other people in terms of developing social skills. You get the idea of what developmental tasks are. Well, I believe marriages also go through developmental tasks, that it's not that you just get married and that's it. It's that you get married and then you start on this journey of developing your marriage. So you can switch to the next one for me, Jeff. So what we're going to talk about tonight is strength training, and it's a conscious decision when you get married, and hopefully before you get married, to look at how do we improve and strengthen our marriage along the way as we get started, as well as the various kinds of things that happen in marriages. So as we get started with a marriage, hopefully there's a lot of romance, a lot of spending time together, being enamored with each other. As we get married, we're looking at hammering out what do we do in terms of our finances, our home, our careers, etc. A lot of communication going on. And that's kind of one of the first
phases in the developmental steps. And for a lot of folks, that's a very appealing stage, a very warm and fuzzy stage. But as you keep going on, some of that warm and fuzzy wears out and you go into another developmental stage. If you are a young couple getting married, if you're 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, one of the things that happens is that our brains don't fully develop really until they're 25. So if you have young people getting married, they are not necessarily mature yet. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a brain development way. So it is pretty natural for some things to be changing as they approach 25, 26, 27. And they indeed may not be the same person that you married because of that developmental change. If you are an older couple getting married, and by older, I mean maybe 28, 29, 30, you've already gone through that development stage and you have established some pretty regular routine habits, some pretty strong habits. So your developmental stage at the start of marriage is to learn how to live with somebody else who has their own independence and trying to meld that together. So those are two examples of developmental stages that maybe right away somewhat of a challenge for a couple. Other stages would be career issues. If a person loses their job and the other person has to step up. Other stages would be the addition of the first child and then additional children. Other stages happen when you've got children that are active and involved in various kinds of things, and you parents are tag teaming, getting the kids to various things and doing so many activities with your own jobs, your own careers, and the children that rarely do you see each other than like ships passing through the night. Then a developmental stage of children challenging the marriage, especially with many teens. It's their developmental task to challenge authority. And so we're dealing with that kind of an atmosphere in the home. Then you're launching your children off to college and you're dealing with the loss. It's a happy loss for most folks in terms of they're going on to live their life, but it still leads you into what might be an empty nest, which is another developmental stage of marriage. And just to kind of recap a little bit about that, if you have not maintained your marriage in terms of your relationship with your spouse through all the busyness of raising your kids, when you get to that empty nest, you may not know who each other is anymore. So these developmental stages, I think, are really, really important to pay attention to and to know when you start your marriage that you really need to build in some resilience with some of these skills that I'm going to talk about in order to navigate these waters. Would you go to the next slide, please? Okay. When I was talking about marriage as a journey, this will kind of encapsulate that for you. When marriage is viewed as a journey, the decision to marry is a choice of journeying partners. Instead of happiness, the goal is to grow into a more perfect representation of the man and woman both were created to become. From this journeying perspective, marriage becomes a series of 3 concurrent journeys, each with their own objectives and responsibilities. So one of the things that folks, I think, really get hung up on, and when they come in for marriage counseling, they will say, I just want to be happy. I want to be happy. And that's such a nebulous term. How do you define happiness? How do you describe happiness? And that may be the goal of couples coming in, is to feel happy. And they may be remembering times when they were happy before, maybe as a couple, maybe not even before they were married, and they want to somehow capture that and put it into the marriage. But happiness, again, coming from my perspective, I don't think is a realistic goal. Because it's so hard to describe and so hard to quantify. We kind of know what it means to feel happy, but is happiness a moment? Is happiness a series of moments? Is it days? Is it years? How do we define happiness? And I really like this idea of marriage as a journey because it really does fit into these developmental stages that I see marriages going through. So this also encapsulates the journey, my journey. My journey's destination is to become the person God created me to be. And that responsibility is 100% mine. My spouse's journey is for my spouse to become the person God created them to be, and that responsibility fully belongs to my spouse. The marital journey, the destination is to create a Christ-centered marriage. The responsibility is shared. When I'm meeting with folks, one of the things that I tell them is our first and most important relationship is with God. And then our second most important relationship is with each other. And that takes some people aback, thinking of it that way. But this is kind of what I want to point out in terms of the marriage journey and strengthening your marriage tonight, hopefully. So if you can switch to the next one. All right, so this is kind of a pictorial description of that, we look to God. We're the barrels, by the way. We look to God for our fulfillment, and then we share that fulfillment with each other, but each of us gets our own individual fulfillment first from God, and then we share that with each other and strengthen each other with that fulfillment, as well as the children and other people in our lives. All right. Next one, which I think is, skip through that one. There we go.
You want this played?
Yes, please.
When we hear the word emotion, most of us think of love, hate, happiness, or fear. Those strong feelings we experience throughout life. Our emotions are the driving force behind many of our behaviors, helpful and unhelpful. Just where do our emotions come from? Our brain is wired to look for threats or rewards. If one is detected, the feeling region of the brain alerts us through the release of chemical messages. Emotions are the effect of these chemical messages traveling from our brain through the body. When our brain detects a potential threat, our brain releases the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol, which prepare us for a fight or flight response. When we detect or experience something rewarding, such as someone doing something nice for you, our brain releases dopamine, oxytocin, or serotonin. These are the chemicals that make us feel good and motivate us to continue on the task or behavior. In these instances, the feeling region of the brain kicks in before the thinking part. Sometimes the reactions of the feeling brain are so strong that it dominates our behaviors, and we're unable to think rationally in the moment. Our emotions hijack our brain. While many of our emotional responses happen subconsciously, our thinking can influence our emotions, and sometimes this can be unhelpful. Just thinking about something threatening can trigger an emotional response. This is where we can manage our emotions with conscious thinking. Our emotions play a powerful role in the way we experience the world. Understanding and regulating our emotions through our thoughts and behaviors can help us take greater control of our brain and achieve our goals.
Okay. So you can go to the next slide. All right. So one of the things that I notice when I'm working with couples, first of all, I have to say that most couples come in way too late. By the time they come in to see me, a lot has happened. A lot of words were said that can't be taken back, and emotional intensity is really high, which is why we're talking about emotions in the brain. So one of the things that I've noticed is that love and hate really there seems to be a fine line between the two, because I will see a couple who have been in love and committed themselves to each other in marriage, yet in my office will spew some of the most hateful, damaging things at each other that I wouldn't even want to hear, but I do hear it. So what's going on is that this emotions are being thrown at one another that I believe in research which suggests are not coming necessarily from whatever is going on with them in the moment, but it's what they are bringing with them from the past. You know, we're all creatures of what has happened to us in the past, and we all have emotional triggers, and those emotional triggers usually are a result of something that has happened to us in childhood, perhaps, or in previous relationships, various kinds of settings that we are responding to that trigger. And something in our spouse presses that trigger, and we respond not with what we would consider to be a reasonable response, but a blow up kind of response, a fight or flight response, like the video talked about. So one of the things that we do is we misinterpret what is happening with our partner, and then we act on this misinterpretation, which really complicates problem solving and getting things figured out in terms of the relationship. So as far as if we were talking about this, number one, we're certain there's a legitimate basis for our feelings about what our partner has done. For example, if a wife had an experience of a boyfriend cheating on her with a friend, when she sees her husband talking to other women, she feels angry towards the husband because she is triggered by the fact that she was cheated on before, and she sees her husband talking to women and makes the assumption that that same thing is happening again. And because she feels upset with him, she believes he must have done something, which absolutely is not thinking rationally about the situation. She's responding to the emotional trigger of what has happened to her in the past. So she believes that he is doing this because he intends to hurt her. She feels hurt, so she believes that his intention was to hurt her. So that amps up that disagreement even further. And then under threat, our perceptions filter into black and white categories, like he always does this, he never does that. And we're into the fight and flight kind of protecting ourselves mode again, that we're not settling down and taking a look at what just happened, what is happening in this moment, and not carrying with it all our baggage from the past, bringing it forward into the moment. And then when we are triggered, we tend to view our partner as wrong. And when we're viewing them as wrong, we're not listening, we're not paying attention. And then we over exaggerate new threats if we feel insecure. So we may have had this, they may have had the same fight or discussion over and over again about him having a conversation with women, and he explains that that's not his intent, but the spouse keeps responding to that as if it is a threat, and it doesn't go away, and it tends to heighten over time. There's a lot of couples that have the same argument over and over and over again and never get it resolved. And I believe it's because of this baggage that they're carrying along, and that they haven't really unpacked that baggage and looked at what's rational, what's real, and how do I need to change my thinking about this. We can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so with these emotional triggers, couples tend to get into what we call the fear cycle. So in this case, we have we'll start at the top with the husband's button. And let's say, for example, that the husband's button is that he does not like feeling controlled. Now, that button may have come from growing up in a home in which parents were very harsh. He lived in a very restrictive setting, and so he developed some animosity about that and does not like feeling as though someone is controlling him. So when he feels controlled, he withdraws. He gets out of the situation. He stops talking. He tries to avoid being controlled. So at the same time, the wife's button may be abandonment. And because her button is abandonment and she sees her husband withdrawing, her reaction is to pursue him. So she keeps going after him, trying to get him to talk, trying to get him to resolve this issue. And he interprets that as more controlling. So you can see how that cycle continues, and it gets worse each time the cycle goes around with any particular issue. Eventually, what happens then is that the two start getting further and further apart. And it's really hard to get them to open up their hearts, to take a look at what their individual buttons are, why they're reacting emotionally, and to try to look at how to resolve this. How do we break this fear cycle? So what we do in therapy is take a look at what are your buttons, what are your triggers, what are you afraid of, and looking at how can your spouse avoid coming at you in the way that you fear, and how can you interpret that in your mind as it's happening to not see it as what's happened to you in the past. We can go to the next one. So what we want to do is switch the couple from operating in a fear cycle, which we know distances them from one another, and have them go into what we call a caring cycle. With the caring cycle, we look at the 5 A's, and this is the way that individuals can take responsibility for their feelings. Remember, we talked about that in one of our first slides, is that our responsibility is to take a look at what is it that we're called to do in our marriage? What is it that we're called to do in terms of managing our own emotions and our own actions? So the first A is awareness. We need to know when our personal alarm is sounding. We need to know when we're feeling triggered. And that trigger may be a sense of anxiety. It might be a sense of anger. It might be fear. So we need to be able to label what we're feeling. And a lot of us don't take time to do that. We just flow with that emotion, and we don't take time to identify and label that emotion. But it's pretty important to do. The next part of that is we need to accept that emotion, welcome the feeling, and don't react impulsively to it. Just acknowledge that, okay, I am feeling anxious. Then we need to allow, we need to ask God for guidance and perspective. How does God ask us to respond when we're fearful? How does God ask us to respond when we're anxious? And taking time in order to read scriptures, or have scriptures very handy for our particular trigger, like anxiety and like worry. Then we need to attend. And again, identify the feeling. What is the feeling? Where is it coming from? And that is where you dig into what in my past has created this feeling before. What is the truth? What's real about this? And what do I want? And who do I want to be? So I'll give an example for myself of something that I learned in my marriage. It was a hard lesson for me. I've been married 37 years. I didn't get married until my husband and I were both 30. So we were one of those later in life people who had our independent ways of doing things pretty well established when we got married. So that in itself was a bit of a challenge. But what I discovered was that at every holiday, particularly Christmas, I did something to make it not pleasant. I would be angry. Usually the feeling was anger. And so between my husband and I, things did not go well over Christmas. And it was very sad, because that's a time when things should be pleasant and happy. So what I remembered and thought about was, why am I doing this? I mean, that seemed really ridiculous, because I wasn't that way before or after, but I was, close to that holiday time. And what I found was, I remembered that when I was growing up, my dad was an alcoholic. And one of the things that he did was, on holidays, particularly Christmas, he would drink a lot. And there were times when he would get really angry when he drank. And there was one time that I can remember he actually passing out under the Christmas tree. And so I could never predict that our holidays as a child, how they were going to go. And I went into them with a lot of fear and trepidation. And I put together that I didn't know how to have holidays any other way. So my dad wasn't there anymore to create the chaos or create the uncertainty. So I did it myself, because that was what was familiar to me, was to have holidays, particularly Christmas, be on edge and not happy. So once I was able to figure that out about myself, I was able to let go of that, and I was better able to understand what I needed to do differently during the holidays in order to have them be more pleasant. And that was a big revelation for me, to be able to do that. So with that, I was able to start communicating better with my husband, to explain to him what was happening, why it was happening, and that what I was trying to do to make it be different, so that he could understand it, because he was but completely baffled. He came from a completely different family life than I came from, and there was no way truly that I could expect that he could understand it. But I did my best to explain it to him, to let him know that it really wasn't him. Even though I may have blamed him, it was me. So, that's an example of examining your own self in this caring cycle, being able to identify what your trigger is, and what the feeling is that goes with the trigger, turning to God, searching the scriptures, and in prayer, and in consult with perhaps your pastor or others, taking a look at, okay, what do I need to do? How do I need to get perspective on this? And then to really do some soul searching in terms of, where is this coming from, and what do I need to do differently, and what's real and what's the truth? And for me, the truth was that I wasn't living in an alcoholic home anymore. And what I wanted was a peaceful, serene holiday. And I wanted to be that person that added to that calmness and that serenity. Hard work. It's hard work to figure that stuff out, and even harder to break a habit that you've had all of your life. But I think these are really key pieces for us as we're coming into our marriage and going on to this marriage journey, to look at what part do we individually play in this, because when it gets down to it, we can only change what we do. We can't change what our spouse does, and we are responsible for making those changes. Okay, can we go to the next one? So again, looking at your emotional triggers, I'm going to have you skip through that one too. All right. The Four Horsemen. Four Horsemen are four ways of reacting that can really, really mess up your relationship with your spouse. And I see these all the time when I'm doing marriage counseling, that the relationship has deteriorated into one and sometimes all of these ways of relating to one another. So one of them is criticism. You attack your partner in a way that suggests there's something wrong with him. And again, that black and white thinking, you always, you never. And the criticism immediately will put your partner on defensive and counterattack. So in couples therapy, what I try to do is to get folks not to focus on the other person in terms of what they're doing wrong, but to look at what they themselves could be doing differently to make things better. And that can be really hard to get them refocused, because this criticism often, again, they come in really late in the process of working on their marriage. That criticism has become a really ingrained part of how they react to one another. Defensiveness. If you're being attacked, if you're being criticized, you're going to become defensive. And when you become defensive, you put up walls. And if somebody's talking to you about what they don't like about you, you're not listening to what they're saying. You are figuring out, how am I going to defend myself from this attack? And with defensiveness, you're not accepting responsibility for your part in things because you're protecting yourself. You're looking at the other person as being who is responsible for the problem. And again, that's not a good problem solving technique, obviously, and it puts distance and walls between the couple. Contempt is really, really hard one to watch when I have couples come in who just, one, usually not both, but one of them just stares and looks and talks to the other with complete contempt. They talk to their spouse as though they are a child, or as though they are someone who is less than them, that they are superior or on the higher ground. They talk about being disgusted. They roll their eyes. They may sneer, use sarcasm, all of those kinds of ways of communicating that are so belittling. And then stonewalling, the listener withdraws from the conversation, trying to protect themselves. They're trying to emotionally shut out what's being said to them or tune out what's being said to them, and may even be at the point of removing themselves from the conversation completely. Going to my notes here, give me a second. One of the things, though, I want to mention about stonewalling is that stonewalling can be misinterpreted. Often I will find with a couple that one of them may be more verbal and faster thinking. I don't mean in terms of intelligence, I mean in processing their thoughts and being able to speak their thoughts than the other partner. And so what happens is that the other partner becomes overwhelmed and they're unable to speak about what their thoughts are, or they can't answer a question because they can't process that quickly. And it's important to discern that in and of itself is not stonewalling. So I have to try to figure that out in a therapy session. Is this person stonewalling? They're just completely withdrawing because they don't want to connect and they don't want to figure this out? Or is it because they're simply overwhelmed by what their spouse is saying and how quickly they're saying it, and they can't process and they can't respond? And the spouse who's doing the talking usually interprets it as that person is intentionally not wanting to participate, and that might not be the case at all. Okay, let's move to the next slide. The antidotes for the Four Horsemen. So instead of criticism, instead of blaming the other person, what we need to work on is I feel statements. Not I feel you do this or I feel you do that, but I feel sad that this happened. I feel sad that our holiday didn't turn out the way we would like it to be. I feel sad that we were fighting on our anniversary and didn't get to spend it in a way that was exciting for us. So you start the discussion in a softer way rather than just attacking. Criticism is attacking. We don't want to attack when we're trying to work out a relationship with our spouse. We want to use I feel statements. We're owning our emotions, not blaming others. For defensiveness, you want to try to listen to what your spouse is saying and take responsibility for your part. So with defensiveness, we have to drop that self-focus. We have to be focused on our spouse and listen to what it is that they are saying and really take a look at what is our part in that. And if appropriate, and more times than often it is appropriate, to say I'm sorry. So that's some of the hardest things for folks to do, is to say I'm sorry. It's important to work that into your regular involvement in your conversations. So instead of contempt, we want to build a culture of appreciation. And one of the things I say all the time with the couples I'm working with is that God intends us to build each other up, not tear each other down. And that is the job of spouses, is to build each other up, to be, if you will, journey partners, but also battle partners. There are so many things going on in the world around us, just with our jobs, with our families, with society, and the kinds of things that are going on. We need to have our home be a place of safety, be a place of refuge. And we need to have the people in our home be the people that we go to when we need comfort, when we need to cry. And we need each other in terms of building each other up, not tearing each other down. And again, couples that are coming into me, again, probably too late, not that their marriage is over, but they should have been in a long time ago, are not building each other up. They're tearing each other down, and switching that around is a real important part of healing their relationship. Then for stonewalling, if we are stonewalling, if we are backing out of a relationship and boxing ourselves off, what we need to do is learn how to self-soothe, meaning not allow our emotions or allow our thinking to go to those dark places. and that may involve prayer, and that may involve challenging the way we're thinking. We need to perhaps ask for a break from the conversation and then return to the conversation when both spouses are calmer. I use that a lot with folks because when they get into arguments, someone may be at the point where they are overwhelmed and they can't process and can't respond. And then the other person gets angry that they're not responding. It's very appropriate to ask for a timeout, and we call it a timeout, that person needs to take a timeout and the other person needs to not follow them on their timeout, which can cause more problems. If the husband, for example, needs a time out and he heads to the basement, it's important for the wife not to follow him into the basement, to give him time to bring his thoughts together or calm down. But the key part of that is that they need to agree to come back later when they're both calmer to continue the discussion. And at the end, it may be that there really is no discussion. They've calmed down enough and they see that what they were worried about and dealing with is not really of significance, and they didn't escalate into a full-blown argument that brings with it more baggage. Okay, next slide, please. Another video.
Sorry. Try it again.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gary Smalley, and I've been helping marriages for years improve. And I've got a couple of friends who have some very unique insights into marriage, and I want you to meet them.
Hey, thank you, Gary. My name is Johnny. And I'm Chachi. And you know, marriages is something I think we're all excited about. It's something that we think we can bring a lot of wisdom to. Isn't that right, Dr. Dobson?
Smalley.
Oh, well, that's
sorry.
our faux pas.
Yes, sir.
We got some killer marriage tips we think they're really going to knock your socks off.
Yeah.
So let's do some dancing, get this party started, and help marriages out
No.
all over the country. Let's do
No,
it.
no, let's go ahead and just roll with the tips. No dance. When you get the chance, finish your wife's sentences for her. It's important that she knows that you know where she's going with a particular thought or sentence.
Yeah, this says, I know you, I love you, and you're predictable, but in a good way.
When on vacation, have fun, but make sure your wife knows exactly how much this thing is costing. Now remember, allowing her to feel guilt can actually be a good thing.
Right you are, because GUILD is actually an acronym for Good Financial Stewardship.
No, that's
Yeah, it is. It is.
doesn't make sense.
It is. It is. It is. It is. It is.
Does not make sense.
It is.
When you're in an argument, it's key to use the time that your spouse is talking to come up with what you want to say next. So it goes like this. You speak, and then while she's speaking, you think, and then you speak again.
And that's how the killer comebacks happen.
Surprise your wife with a weekend trip for you and your buddies. Husbands, doing this will help her see that you're taking care of your needs.
And taking care of your needs will give you the ability to take care of her needs. You know, putting your kids in timeout works for most parents, but putting your spouse in timeout can also be really effective. Putting your spouse in the timeout chair will hopefully help her see things from a different perspective, preferably yours.
And if you get any pushback, I'd let her know that you're having a hard time telling her apart from the children.
That's a classic.
Whenever your wife tells you about something she wants to buy, respond with the sound effect of a cash register. Here's a little role play for you. Hey, honey, I'm going to go buy some skinny jeans.
Cha-ching.
Hey, honey, I'm going to go get some bread now.
Cha-ching.
You know, guys, those are kind of horrible tips.
Okay.
guess she didn't like them that much.
I mean, when you think about it, those were killer tips, and I think they'd like kill most marriages.
Well, I guess we're at an impasse then.
Awkward.
Hey, Gary, here's an idea though. To keep the video rolling, let's just do the robot at the end and send this thing out for some fun, if you know what I'm saying. You gonna do that with us?
I tell you what, I was, a little bit uncomfortable by this. It's kind of like weird.
Okay, so I think that video is pretty self-explanatory that those are indeed not tips to help your marriage, but tips that will create difficulties. One of the most important elements that promotes intimacy between two people is the ability of each to take responsibility for his or her own feelings. We do not communicate our feelings by saying, I feel that you. We communicate our feelings by saying, I feel sad, hurt, lonely, scared. Such vulnerability is the beginning of intimacy and caring. So again, we go back to what we talked about initially, is that we need to be responsible for our own feelings, our own baggage that we're bringing with us, unpacking our own baggage, and looking at how do we manage that in terms of improving our relationship. Next one, please. All right, some emotional communication tips. The listener must understand and the speaker must feel understood. So the speaker, and I find that there's a lot of difficulty with folks, with couples, asking the other couple, the other part of their relationship person to have time to talk. So if you have a concern, it's important that you're able to ask for time to talk and even outline some time. If you think this is something that's going to take 5 minutes, then you ask for 5 minutes. If you think it's going to be something that needs a half an hour, ask for that. Nothing is more frustrating than having a conversation with somebody who is, when you're being interrupted by the kids, interrupting by other phone calls, you need to be assertive and ask for time to talk about a concern. And as a speaker, you need to use I statements. Again, you don't want to be criticizing the other person. You want to be taking responsibility for your feelings, saying, I feel, I think, and avoiding the you statements, because again, you becomes blaming and puts the responsibility on the other person as opposed to what you yourself are feeling. And be patient and self-soothe if the partner needs some time to clarify what you're saying. Again, people process thoughts differently, and you may have been thinking about an issue for a long time, but then you present it to your spouse and this is the first they know of it. It may take them some time to think it through and decide how they do feel and how they do think about it. So for you to expect an immediate reaction or a conclusive resolution to what you're talking about probably is unrealistic. So you have to be able to be patient about that. And then with any communication, stay as positive as you can and be able to state what your need is, or what you're hoping for the outcome for this. So it's not just a generic kind of request or a generic kind of communication. You're asking for something specific. And the listener, kind of the last video kind of points to that you don't want to be, as a listener, forming what you're going to say next while your spouse is talking. So you need to postpone your own agenda within the relationship and the other things going on around you, whether it be work or the kids. You need to be able to focus on the person who's talking. Mirroring, or we used to call it active listening, is what you hear your spouse saying. So you might say, is there more to that? Am I understanding you correctly? What I heard you say was this. Validate your spouse's emotions. I can see what you're saying, or I see that you're angry. I can tell that you're angry. I can hear that you're nervous. So validate their feelings and empathize with them. Yeah, that I would be angry too, or that must be really hard for you to cope with. And be open and non-judgmental. Don't tell them how they should feel or why they shouldn't feel the way that they're feeling. Just listen, and don't put your own spin on what it is that they're telling you. And when you're doing that, you're opening the door for your spouse to be able to share what's on their mind and not feel like they have to edit what's coming out because you're not listening, or because you're going to predictably react in a certain way, perhaps judgmentally. You're building that bridge in terms of communication with each other. If you are a speaker who is able to share things in a way that's not threatening, and a listener who's able to actually listen to what that person is saying rather than forming your own opinions and judgments. Next one, please. So we've talked about our most important relationship is with God, and that we need to continue working on that individually as we are going through the stages of our marriage. And we've talked about identifying our responsibilities and our feelings and our emotional hot buttons, and looking at where they come from. We've talked about how to communicate with each other in a way that's not threatening, that doesn't bring those four horsemen into play. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things that you can be doing when you're not necessarily, these are kind of day by day kinds of things. So it's really important for couples to connect with each other in ways that are meaningful to them. Rituals can include meal times, everybody, the family, the couple sitting down at the table together. Morning rituals, which might be devotions together, praying together, or it might be having a cup of coffee together before the kids get up. Bedtime rituals, not going to bed angry. Family vacations and getaways just for the couple. Celebrating triumphs, whether it be via career or within the family. Having special individualized family driven, not extended family, but individual family driven celebrations of holidays and birthdays. And then rituals around sexual intimacy, realizing that sex doesn't necessarily always have to be spontaneous. There might be some, especially with kids around, things that you have to do to promote sexual intimacy. Need to, and this should happen before marriage. The couple needs to be exploring these things, what their beliefs are, what their values are, their wants and their needs. One of the things that I find with couples, even into their 50s or later, is that as they go along their developmental stages, their developmental tasks, they don't really look at, where do we go from here? What's our plan from here? When our kids have left home, what is our plan for our life? What do we want? What do we need? And sadly, there are many folks who don't even look at the retirement issue. When do we want to retire? When can we retire? When we do retire, what is it that we're going to do? And I think it's really important to have those conversations all along those developmental stages of your life, looking to the future and looking at how do we meld our beliefs and our values and our wants and our needs together on this journey. So that we can both feel like we're going in the direction that we need to go. And next one. So in order to do that, we have to talk. We have to have heart-to-heart time with each other, and we need to do it regularly. I recommend to my couples that they have a date night every week. And this needs to start, I think, even at the beginning of a marriage. It needs to continue all the way through. This date night doesn't have to be something that you spend a lot of money on or gets to be very extravagant, but it should be creative. And it should be a time where you are able to talk about not just what's going on in your current life and problem solving, those kinds of things, but what I talked about in the previous slide, and that is to look about what are our dreams, what are our fears, what are our goals and our joys in terms of our relationship and for us individually. We have to make that heart-to-heart connection. If we don't, we just move further and further apart. And like I said earlier, when you get to the point where you are an empty nest or you are retired, you may find that you don't even really know each other anymore. And that's really what we need to avoid. Next one. This is kind of self-explanatory. And the next one, please. And this explains the date nights that I talked about just a little bit ago. Next one, please. So I encourage couples to develop a strength training plan. Identify your individual journey to become what God has called you to be, and then look at how do we implement that on our shared marital journey. Take responsibility for your own emotions and communicate them in healthy ways, not unhealthy ways. Be mindful of the Four Horsemen, those 4 ways of communicating that are extremely destructive to relationships. Set aside a time for emotionally communicating with one another, just not about details of your life and who's going to do what, but connecting with the emotions. Create shared meaning, have date nights, deepen your connection with each other through these heart-to-heart conversations on your date nights or throughout the day, and prioritize those date nights and spending purposeful time together. I guess if I were going to go back to sum up what I think is extremely important here is that the concept is that marriage isn't something that you just do and then you ride the wave. It's work, and it's hard work. And both of the couple needs to be focused on doing that work throughout the course of their marriage, and realizing that with these developmental tasks that we go through, things are going to be challenging at times. But if we build that framework of our connection to what God wants for us as individuals and in our marriage, and on good solid communication and the attempts to understand one another, those are the things that are going to get us through. But again, it goes down to being work that needs to start even before the marriage starts. That's why I've referred several times to people come in too late. And that's so very sad, because often there's one person in the couple who years ago said, let's go get counseling. And the other person says, no, we don't need that. And then when the person who initially wanted counseling has had enough several years later and decides they want out of the relationship, then the person who didn't want counseling sets up the counseling appointment and brings in that person. And by that time, it can be very much too late, because that person has checked out and has no more desire to keep working on things. So I encourage people, if we could make it happen, our medical system encourages preventive checks like mammograms and maybe electrocardiograms, stress tests periodically through our lives. If we did that for marriage, believe that once a year we should go in for a marriage checkup, just to see where we're at and maybe what we need to tweak or do differently. I think that would go a long way to thwarting some of the difficulties that we have, and thwarting those many, many years of buildup of emotion and buildup of animosities between couples. And that's my dream, that someday it will become that easy for folks to start going into counseling before they really need counseling, and maybe be able to prevent that need for that those really serious counseling kinds of sessions in which one person is getting ready to check out or has checked out from the other. Okay, so that ends what I've got. And I guess we're pretty much on time, and we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Toni. I'm going to open up in just a little bit for some chat for some other folks. But one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you right away is in terms of preparation. As you indicated throughout the presentation, often couples come in too late. They've already emotionally checked out. They've already struggled through the feelings, the triggers, the responses, the non-responsiveness. What can we do as life teams and life chapters to help underscore the importance of building this early in advance? And what would it look like, in your opinion, for life ministry to do this within their congregation? What do you think would be helpful?
Well, that is really an excellent suggestion. We have what we call a Marital First Responders course that is designed to go into congregations. And what it does basically is help build a supportive atmosphere for the folks that are struggling with their marriages. People will go to other people, friends, acquaintances, long before maybe they'll even go to their pastor or they go to a counselor. And when you have somebody coming to you talking about their marriage or their difficulties in their relationship, how we respond to that as lay people or other people in the congregation can really help turn things around. What we want to do is to listen. What we want to do is not join in terms of their concerns about their spouse and say, yeah, I always thought he was not a very nice person, or yeah, I think maybe you do need to get out of that relationship. We need to look at how do we speak to these folks who are struggling with affirming kinds of statements. And some of that may be going back into what we're doing in our own relationships or what we know and say, well, when this was happening with me, this is what I tried. So what we want to do is to build congregational support for when those people do come to us to be able to find ways to support them. Because I tell you, when a couple is struggling and they go out and talk, they can find people probably within their social group or friend group who are going to cheer them on in terms of seeking divorce or seeking separation. And those are and they're going to feel good talking to those people because their viewpoint is being supported. What we need to do is to be able to challenge that, but in a gentle way, so we don't turn them away, so that they know that there is hope and that there are other ways of going about doing this. So yeah, there are programs that can be instituted into congregational settings or other kinds of settings that can help us as lay people. We don't have to be counselors, but we can know how to relate to those folks to help them. And ultimately, what we may want to be doing, when we build enough trust, is to be able to direct them toward resources they can read, professional counseling, and my personal bias is that you need to look for Christian counselors, preferably Lutheran counselors, because not all counselors are pro-marriage. They maybe will jump on the divorce bandwagon pretty quickly. And so we need to be careful about who we refer folks to and have those resources in hand to be able to help those folks.
So what I hear you saying is that it would be good for our life teams and chapters and our life ministry departments to be asking their local congregation pastor, what would be helpful for you? Would it be helpful if we ran a presentation, if we had a weekend workshop on a Saturday and we invited a licensed therapist, a Lutheran therapist who could maybe introduce some of these concepts? Invite our young folks before they start getting engaged and start talking about these, and then invite the couples as well. And then maybe do some of these on a yearly basis as a touch-up. Speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent approach to find out what do pastors feel they need in their congregation. And there are a variety of things. We, and I'm sure across the country, there are folks who can do the marriage retreats. And it can be localized in terms of, it doesn't have to be something that is even outside the congregation. It can be within the congregation if that's what they prefer. You can have folks that come in and maybe do a series of presentations. Like every couple of weeks, an hour or two on different ways to improve your marriage or communicate better. Find out what the pastor may feel would fit in well with the kinds of folks that they have in their congregation.
Thank you for those responses. I'd open up to some other questions if some of you would like to ask some questions of Toni. Feel free to jump in.
I have a quick question. So like my husband Dalton and I were still, I think we've been married a little under 3 years, and so we haven't experienced a lot of the developmental marriage milestones that you talked about. Um, as those things progress and we're aware that we're going to develop through that, do you have anything that you recommend reading or anything like that as we hit those different milestones?
I'm sad to say that I am not a reader, so I can't offer anything in specific, and maybe somebody else online right now would be able to do that. One of the basic things that I think is a good read is the 5 love languages. If you haven't read that, I think that's a really good starter in terms of a couple being able to understand each other's better and each other's love languages. Another thing that you can do is search, focus on the family kinds of, they have a lot of resources there, and that can help you with that. But maybe somebody else here online would have some suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. I know that like through the church, there's a lot of different resources that we could reach out to. I was just curious if you had any specific recommendations.
Jim, go ahead. You have maybe some recommendations there?
For a while, my wife and I were participating in Lutheran marriage encounter weekends, which helps couples communicate. And it covers some of the main points that you mentioned also, and learning how to express the I feel statements in your marriage. Since that time, we've had about 4 other couples join together here in our area who have been at a weekend, and we've been going through a book about once a year. 3 that stand out are Love and Respect, Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage, and now we're looking at the meaning of marriage. And these 3 have been, I think, more exceptional than the other ones. But each one we learn from. We meet about 7-8 times a year, every month and a half or so, and go over a chapter or 2, and take turns leading and just encourage each other and share things as a group that we feel comfortable sharing, and all with the idea of strengthening our own marriages.
Any other suggestions out there for resources to read?
Hi, Pastor. It's Jeremy. I do have a resource. Actually, at seminary, they've been having us in preparation for pastoral care and counseling and just dealing in the parish. Some non-theology books by a guy named John Gottman, who has books about the concept of the bid as the basic unit of relationship interaction, about whenever you sort of communicate either verbally or through expressions or whatever that you want to connect with your partner or with anybody in any kind of relationship, being aware of the concept of the bid. The book has kind of a funny name. It's something like 5 Tips to Strengthen Your Marriage, but look for John Gottman, Gottman. Those books by him have actually been really excellent.
Yep.
Thank you for that resource, Jeremy. And you had another question. Go ahead and bring that up, please.
I did. Toni, thanks for the presentation. It's been really, at one point, whoops, I think I lost you there. You did mention at one point the importance of apology in the marital relationship. I may have missed, I've been kind of on the move tonight, but I may have missed if you discussed the importance of forgiveness in that relationship, and how inculcating a spirit of I forgive you is important, or not, I guess, in a marriage or in a household.
Oh yeah, and I did not talk about forgiveness, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is also a critical part. There's a lot of things that we do in our marriages that need to be forgiven, and some that come into my office have to do with infidelity and pornography, and those are biggies. So working on forgiveness, and again, we go back to our faith base. And we talk about forgiveness is not necessarily forgetting what's happening or happened, and it's not necessarily bringing the relationship back to where it was prior to whatever happened that needed the forgiving. But it's very, very critical. If you don't have forgiveness in the relationship, then completely upset the balance of the journey. You're not on the same journey. So again, forgiveness is extremely important. And I think that when we deal with infidelity and pornography, and those are the two things that come to my mind right now, is that forgiveness is important, but it's also important to remember that forgiveness does not necessarily equal trust. You can and should forgive, but that doesn't mean that trust comes right along with it. So what I prepare I'll call him the offending spouse, the person who engaged in infidelity or pornography, is that your spouse is dealing with, how do I trust this person again? And for them, it may take a lot of time to build that trust. The way to build trust is to act in a trustworthy way. So the charge to that particular spouse who was the offender is that you have to behave in a trustworthy way in order to develop that trust again. So we do talk a lot about forgiveness, but we also talk a lot about forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that life goes back to the way it was prior to some of these really difficult situations like infidelity and pornography use.
To that end as well, I would recommend a resource that is a Lutheran resource called Ambassadors of Reconciliation. And the Ambassadors of Reconciliation have some flyers, some handouts that you can use called a forgiveness track. And it really practices that idea of confession and absolution. And I think it's good for families to practice that, especially as you have children. The idea that sometimes parents can sin against their children by the way they discipline or they yell. They can break confidences, they can lose trust. And when moms and dads model the confession and forgiveness, they express to their children, I have sinned against you and I have hurt you in these ways, and they get the very specifics out. And then they say, I ask for your forgiveness. And then the child can actually extend that forgiveness. I forgive you, mom or dad. And then go through that. It's a great ritual, as you were talking about adding rituals to the marriage, and it models this for the children, and so they can see this right away, that even moms and dads, when they have arguments, then the children can watch mom and dad model that confession and forgiveness. Sometimes people are uncomfortable with it, and so that's why having a format, even a small liturgy, that Ambassadors of Reconciliation offers, is an excellent way to just go ahead and formalize it so that you don't have to make it up on your own. And then you can utilize it at your needs. And it can be something that you pull out on a regular basis, as well as for those specific times that you need it as well. Of course, our Lutheran service book has individual confession absolution liturgies in there that can be used at home. And of course, in cases where it is important for that person to hear that forgiveness from Christ himself, that is what the private confession with the pastor is also available to do. And I would encourage that those who are feeling the stress and anxiety of the law upon them when they know they've been caught in a sin can practice that personal private confession with their pastor, and then model that again with their spouse when they can go home and confess and ask for forgiveness of whatever sins that they have committed against each other.
I had a question.
Yes, Joe, go ahead.
Earlier, you mentioned infidelity, which we can all understand how that affects the marriage. You also mentioned pornography, which unfortunately is so prevalent on the internet. If a 9-year-old can't get to it, there's something mentally wrong with them. No, I'm serious when I say it's over the entire internet that you can get to that very easily too. My question though is this, do you have any comments or experiences related to the prevalence of these various sites for dating, or sometimes it just sounds like friendly and it turns into oftentimes a dialogue which can be embarrassing when if it's ever revealed. But I just wondered if you had any comments about the prevalence of these sites for dating and meeting people online.
Well, I can't quote you statistics, but I can tell you that there's innumerable amounts of those kinds of things out there. And I will kind of go around your question a tad and talk a little bit about social media. And that is when I'm working with folks, I encourage them not to be on social media. You know, I've had couples come in because one of them will have discovered that the other one is on a dating site. And when confronted, they say, well, I'm just looking to see what's out there. Or they'll be following them on their Facebook or other social media platform and find a questionable conversation between them and the opposite sex. So my feeling is that social media in marriages does not belong there. And if you are going to be on Facebook or whatever it is, that you're on there as a couple, or if you're going to be separate, that your spouse has full access to your password and your profile so that they can look at it at any time. But social media has, I think, caused more problems with relationships and marriages. It's a, pardon my expression, but really a tool of the devil, I think. Very, very much a part of problems going on with couples. So the prevalence, I think, you know, you can find anything you want out there, anywhere, from what appears to be fairly mild kinds of things to very serious, dark kinds of things in terms of dating or meeting up with folks. Yeah, it's prevalent and it's bad stuff.
Yeah, I think what it does, it's sort of like, you know, it's always greener on the other side of your fence.
Yep.
Like pornography. I remember like the old Playboy thing. The images there were so graphic and no woman could ever measure up to them. But a lot of young men would be taken, or older men would be taken in by that, think this is something that they're missing. And the same thing with the social media. I'm feeling is that what happens, you get intertwined in a conversation and you always think, well, this person, how much better they are than what you're actually experiencing in your life. And before you know it, you get kind of caught up in this, and then it even becomes to a point where you're rejecting your companion and spouse. So well, I don't know what the answer is, but I mean, we could take Mr. Zuckerberg and put him in a rocket, fire him up somewhere, and have him gone. No, but I mean, the internet has turned out to be a terribly, terribly dangerous kind of instrument for people, and the social sites are even more dangerous.
If 30 years ago, in order to cheat on your spouse, you were going to have to go somewhere and do something. You're going to have to go to a bar. You're going to have to go somewhere where you're going to connect with people. You don't have to do that anymore. You can go into the bathroom and connect with somebody. You can go into your bedroom. You can do it while your spouse is sleeping and have an internet emotional affair, if you will. So it's so much easier to cross those boundaries, those lines, and nobody finds out about it. So yeah, it's not a good thing at all. And again, if I had my way, my couples that I'm working with would not be on social media, period. The other thing is texting. Texting, you know, makes it so easy to talk to somebody you shouldn't be talking to. So that's why I talk about having your passwords available to your spouse so that they can look at your text messages. And if they can follow and be able to hold you accountable. And if you've got something to hide and don't give your passwords, you know, there's a red flag.
I'm a lawyer, by the way, and I've had a couple of cases now where older males get involved with very young, I don't want to say teenagers, almost teenagers. And it's the texting back and forth. And then before you know it, there's like pictures that are traded. And then it gets deeper into people talking with each other.
Yep.
And I had a couple of cases where these men were like in their 30s. And the person on the other side was, you know, still not quite 18. And it's very sorrowful seeing that, because then it totally destroys the family. I mean, these are both men that are married. So
Yep.
what they're doing when it's found out, and it will be one way or another, you know, somebody jealous, somebody mean, somebody wants to get back at somebody. And the poor wife then is pulled into something she had no awareness of, and it really hurts their family.
It does.
Well, thank you, Joe, for those comments. Appreciate hearing from you tonight. I'd like to pull the conversation back to some of the prior thoughts. Dan, you had a question about, would you like to ask about how to preserve this from the start, even before we get married?
Yes, it's been my observation that objectively speaking, a lot of folks should not have gotten married. And I'm not just talking about premarital counseling, although that can be helpful, but it really goes even before engagement. Because the reality is when couples come in for premarital counseling, they've pretty much made up their minds. And so I wonder if it doesn't make sense to take a step backwards, a step back in time, and think about what we can do to foster a sort of a realistic attitude towards marriage and work out some of these issues before people get married. And also, I should just want to say that a lot of the attitudes that people bring into marriage, they've been practicing those long before that. So there's a lot of work to do up front. Your thoughts on that and how we can address those concerns?
Well, addressing them, what I would hope for would be the individual growing up in a healthy family that shares these beliefs and being able to bring their children up in that way. In order to be able to, as you guys were talking about earlier, modeling for kids how to communicate appropriately, how to treat your people that you love, and how to forgive, and how to ask for forgiveness and apologize, that all of these things would be ingrained as they were growing up in their family. And as they get to be younger and looking at possibly dating, to be able to have conversations about how do you choose someone as a dating partner? What do you look for? What is important? What are your values? And does this person that you've chosen, do they share your values? And how do you see that maybe as being a problem at some point? So parents, I think, are the key people. But the problem is that we have homes in which the parents don't have those values. So we have young people being launched into adulthood without that value base. And I honestly do not know how to fix that. It's a monumental task, it appears to me. So I have to narrow down. I narrow it down when I'm thinking about it. Otherwise, I get really depressed, to look at how do we build that into our churches, our congregations, our Lutheran schools. How do we build that in from day one with our children, so that they learn about and adopt these values as they go out into the world. We may not be able to do that for everyone. We can't do that for everyone, but we can do that as a family and as a congregation.
And I think it's very important that we, you brought up the kind of the history that you bring into marriage, and you talked about, a 20 or 30-year-old coming into marriage, and they have all the history of what they have experienced. But the young person, the 18, 19, 20-year-old coming into a relationship also has history within that family of origin. It's very important to explore what that means. What are the family of origin issues? What are the trigger points that this person grew up with? And to explore those, because they're not just going to go away just because you start dating. They're not going to just go away just because you say you're in love. And after you say I do, that's when all of these issues start to come forth again. And you need to be able to explore those ahead of time to find out, is this something that I'm willing to invest time and energy and at times put up with? Do I have the spiritual nomenclature to go along with it so that I can help? Am I thinking I'm going to change this person? from the things that they've experienced. And do I have the right attitude coming into how I'm going to help, as you said, fulfill myself first in terms of what's God's designed for me, and allow my spouse to become what God designs for them, and then work together on this marriage. It takes a lot of exploring, doesn't it?
It does. And it takes a lot of, it's personal fortitude to do that. You really have to bring yourself to task and look at things that may be painful to look at. And I don't know that an 18 or 19-year-old is able to do that. I mean, some are, but some are not. I mean, I think adolescence itself, adolescents are getting older and older and older. I mean, they're in the mid-20s, not just brain-wise, but behaviorally. So for them to take a really serious approach to self-exploration, not sure how well that goes.
So Jeremy says youth groups, young adult groups, and spending time with them. And I think this is an excellent point, that teaching these concepts, how to look for the right spouse, how to date properly, how to model the expression of feelings, all of these things that you brought out in your slide can be taught to your youth groups and put to the test of time and the responsibility of parents using this within your life ministry and your life teams to teach and model this, and bring them to conferences or workshops within your church so that they also, from the youth side, can talk about these concepts before, and they can be exposed to these ahead of time.
Pastor Duncan?
Yes.
I'm not experienced because I've been married 38 years. Still figuring it out, because you're changing and you're shifting. And now my husband and I are going through the aches and pains part, and knee surgeries and hip replacements and all that kind of stuff. But to me, in 38 years, and we've had our ups and our downs, and probably a 10-year, very serious time where I didn't know if we were going to stay together as a couple. The best prescription that anyone gave us was to be in church every Sunday, receiving the sacrament and going to Bible study. And, you know, we would go to church, but we would split the scene real quick because we had things we had to do. And once we started immersing ourselves in Bible study, and we were then also being mentored by watching the other couples that were older couples than us that were there. It can't be discounted. I mean, we can, I think, I'm not opposed to anything that was said here today in terms of counseling, but the Word of God, keeping our faith strong, correct the law, the right distinction between law and gospel, and that sacrament are the prescription for anything that ails us. And I think that's the youth groups need that. If you're working with youth, that is one of the most important things to emphasize with them going forward, dating and or marriage.
Yes, excellent. And thank you for that reminder, Monica. You are absolutely right. The Word of God is the power unto salvation, and it is the one that will give us the guide and the hope and the restoration, and it will keep us focused in both the law and the gospel. And so you are absolutely right to point us in that direction. Toni?
I 100% agree also. I have nothing more to add to that. I appreciate that, Monica. I think that's extremely important.
And I think that maybe we can wrap this up, Toni. If you could give us some, you mentioned how important it is for finding good Lutheran marriage and family therapists, a Christian marriage and family therapist. Are there some questions that you might give as guidelines that life teams or life chapters, when helping their pastors or their members, what are some questions, frameworks that you can go into a therapy counselor and ask in order to help discern, is this somebody who we think might offer some good advice based on the Word of God?
Sure. One of the first things that I tell folks when I'm making a referral out is that they need to be good consumers. If they find somebody's philosophy doesn't fit with them, It's no different than going to a doctor and you don't feel that that doctor fits with you. You find another one. So be a good consumer. Don't feel guilty about that. Different than therapy hopping, when somebody tells you things you need to hear but don't want to hear and you move on to somebody else. That's a whole different thing. So be a good consumer. There are many counseling agencies that have websites, and there are many that will have statements of faith that are faith-based. And so what I do is I go on those and I read to see how closely those align with the LCMS values. And they may not be LCMS. They may be from another group, but the basic tenets align with LCMS. So that's one thing you can do, is do a search on their website. The other thing that is important is when you do get an appointment scheduled with somebody, to ask to see if you can visit with them on the phone first and ask them some questions, basically like, you know, what is your faith base? What do you believe about marriage? Do you believe about your relationship, our relationship with God, and how does that play into your therapy? And see what you get from them in terms of an answer, and see how that fits with you. Phone, because then you don't have to go there and invest and all that kind of stuff. It's possible they won't do it with you on the phone. If they don't, then you go in person and you ask those same questions. And if you don't get the answer that you feel comfortable with in terms of fitting with your faith base, thank you, but I don't think this is going to work for me, and you go on to find someone else. One of the things that we're doing is we are connecting with pastors. As we said, we're working in South Dakota and Nebraska and moving on to a couple of other states. What we do is we find pastors, LCMS pastors, and we ask them, who do you refer to that you feel comfortable with? And then we build up a referral basis on that, because they actually have feedback from these folks, and they actually have opinions on others that they don't feel folks should go to. So we make some connections with pastors to find out who they feel comfortable connecting with as well.
Thank you very much for that. So what I'm hearing is that life teams and life chapters could spend some time helping their pastors and their congregation do some pre-work, doing some of the referral basis here, looking for licensed marriage and family therapists within their communities, maybe doing some interviewing and investigating so that they can help with their pastor to identify some good resources for when those pastors need it. I also hear that it might be useful for the life teams and chapters to find some written and communication references that they could develop and maybe put on their website, or have broadsheets or flyers available, or maybe even produce some newsletter templates that could be put in on a periodic basis, or some announcements in the church bulletins or the newsletters that might have good resources that people could use. I'm also hearing how important it is that we get these ideas into our youth groups, and how important it is that we start establishing these good concepts through workshops that we can do throughout the year. Any other last comments?
I have a quick question, Pastor Duncan.
Go ahead.
What you just mentioned, I thought was a great idea of, you know, stuff that you can put onto websites of various life teams. Like we've got a website with all kinds of stuff on it. I'm wondering if there's a way of developing a catalog of life teams' websites and what they contain. So for example, one of the things that we're taught when we're going through the development of a life team is to pick a couple of areas of emphasis and do them well, you know, rather than trying to cover all the bases and maybe doing a mediocre job. So my question is there a plan maybe from Lutherans for Life or just some other way to know, say, let's say St. Stephen's Lutheran Church in Florida might have a great, on their website, might have a great resource when it comes to marriage, and we might be able to tap into that. So is there any plan to perhaps develop a resource like that?
We're talking about it right now.
Awesome.
And I think that, you know, these kind of comments just help affirm that from a networking and a distribution standpoint, Lutherans for Life has an opportunity and maybe an ability to be a clearinghouse, a resource like that. So these are good discussions, and thank you, Ronnie, for that. And let's continue it. Any other final comments before we close tonight? All right. Well, Toni, thank you very much for spending some time and sharing with us with your expertise. It's been a pleasure. If you want to put in your contact information into the chat section, please feel free to do that, your email or your phone number or how you want people to contact you. Folks, we'll be back again on the 16th in 2 weeks with our executive director, Reverend Michael Solomon, who's going to be talking about newer technologies. And so we'll hear a little bit about how life issues are being enhanced as well as challenged by some of the newer technologies these days. So that'll be on the 16th, 2 weeks. The Lord be with you. Take care, everybody. God bless.
So with you. Night. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.